wide receiver, all of the cornerback spots, both starting tackle spots. There are a lot of position groups that have key battles for Penn State as training camp is set to begin.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy first day of training camp to all of those who celebrate. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of its customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Talking about position battles, just identifying them on offense, defense, special teams, as Penn State is officially 1 month away from West Virginia and the depth chart still isn't exactly sorted out. Let's jump into it. I'll start on the offensive side. I feel like I'm going to go from most important or some of the most important position battles to least important or not as concerning. Wide receiver number 2 and slot wide receiver. Since your passing game was well below average and you made an offensive coordinator change to correct some of these issues, you still don't have wide receiver 2 figured out or the slot wide receiver. And I know what people are thinking. Well, let's just assume it's Julian Fleming, right? Not the case. Not the case. Amari Evans is going to be battling for that second wide receiver position. The only one that is really safe is Trey Wallace. Amari Evans and Julian Fleming are going to be competing for wide receiver number 2. And then the slot wide receiver, that could either go to a Liam Clifford or Caden Saunders. And I'm not really here to make predictions just yet. Again, training camp is just officially underway today here on the last day of July. But just identifying these battles. So Julian Fleming comes in as a 5-star, and Amari Evans has always been that underrated 3-star, high upside, but he's a speedster. And why he's in contention for the second wide receiver spot is because of that speed element. He's much faster than Julian Fleming. Julian Fleming obviously brings that 5-star potential, veteran experience, the run blocking, which was certainly needed. So I can't pick a winner here even to begin training camp because I feel like both these wide receivers are needed. I feel like both of them need to split reps because you need that run blocking element from Julian Fleming at times. You also need Amari Evans's speed to take the top off of a defense, to add those explosive plays. So I think this is really dependent on formation, play type. Both players provide different skill sets that you need. I mean, yes, you could hypothetically have them both on the field at the same time, but if we're talking about who's that complementary receiver to Trey Wallace on the boundary, either Amari Evans or Julian Fleming, they are going to be going at it for the wide receiver number 2 spot. For wide receiver 3 or slot wide receiver, I don't really consider the slot the third wide receiver, but that's what most people kind of indicate that as. But it's Caden Saunders and Liam Clifford. This is shaping up to be another 50-50 type of battle. We'll see who is the true winner, and it might be better if both of them end up seeing split reps. I think that's better for the team in general. Now, over the course of, I guess, all of 2023, and in winter workouts and a little bit of spring ball here. So it's been a while, no recent intel, but the indicator has always been that Liam Clifford has been the leader in this potential battle. It's not that Caden Saunders is far behind or wouldn't be able to catch up, but it's always Liam Clifford would have the nod to be the next slot receiver over a Caden Saunders here. So again, that intel comes a little further back. A lot can change over the summer and everything else. And of course, going into training camp where these battles are truly decided. We'll flip over to the defense because Penn State not only has 1 cornerback spot, 2, but 3 starting corners that are moving on to the NFL. You lose Kalen King, Daquan Hardy, and Johnny Dixon. And now you got to replace all of them. You went to the transfer portal to get A.J. Harris. He is going to be battling for that number 1 cornerback spot. But I think it's fair to say that Cam Miller would be in that battle as well, to be that primary boundary corner that either shadows the number 1 wide receiver or takes away a boundary for Penn State, whatever they decide to do schematically for Tom Allen's defense. I think AJ Harris is going to be the first cornerback just because he has traits that are close to what a Joey Porter Jr. did, where you can isolate him. You don't have to worry about safety help. And that's why you bring in a player like AJ Harris, who was a top 50 prospect once upon a time in the nation and committed to Georgia. So I think, and all of the intel coming away from spring football is that AJ Harris is that guy. For cornerback number 2, this is where you have Jalen Kimber, and if Cam Miller doesn't win the number 1 cornerback spot, that Penn State likes to operate, and I think this will continue the way that they did with Manny Diaz. Tom Allen will probably adopt it as well, where they have a cornerback 2A and a 2B on the boundary. So like they did with a Johnny Dixon and a Kalen King when Joey Porter Jr. was there at Penn State before he got drafted by the Steelers. You are going to have a similar sense here where you have Jalen Kimber and Cam Miller almost splitting boundaries on the other side of the football field. Now here's where it really gets interesting here. Penn State has a lot of safeties that they can play. So that third cornerback spot is normally going to go, who's the slot cornerback? My choice, or at least a battle for playing time here, Adavian Collins has been receiving high praise, rave reviews, and I think he'll be able to back that up with a training camp. Remember, he came over from Mississippi State in the transfer portal and was almost like a wait and see kind of thing, or a sit and wait your turn type of deal for Collins. And he's really progressed nicely here from what we've gathered from the coaching staff. So Adavian Collins would be one of the choices for that slot cornerback spot. I think a Cam Miller, any of those guys will kind of rotate in. But Jalen Reed and KJ Winston make this very interesting because Zach Wheatley is going to be your starting free safety. And you don't just bench Jalen Reed or KJ Winston just because they both play the same position. You create an additional position to accommodate them. So that's where the conversation around the 4-2-5 has been really is starting to trend for Penn State because they just have too many good players at the safety spot. But cornerbacks are better at covering in the pass than safeties. Not necessarily. This lion position that's going to be in Tom Allen's defense is going to be specifically crafted for a Jalen Reed, for a KJ Winston, and those two guys can cover as well. They're not liabilities. They're not just hard-hitting safeties, extra pseudo linebackers in this case. So that's where a slot cornerback the position battle there is in itself is, do you keep Jalen Reed on the field? And I think you do, or do you bring in an Adavian Collins to help out? And you can always run 6 defensive backs as well. I don't think Penn State is going to box itself in to one type of secondary look. But that's the position battles at cornerback because you have all the vacancies from a season ago. That's what it's going to look like here to start training camp. Still to come, linebacker number 2. Who's going to be that? If they run a 4-2-5 primarily, who is that second linebacker next to Kobe King? Also, your starting offensive tackles. You lost both Caden Wallace and Olu Fashanu. Is that a big question mark? Who could end up factoring into those competitions? That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of its customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, you can see some Major League Baseball lines. Now, the Pirates and the Phillies are off for Thursday, but you could bet on the Cardinals and the Cubs. That's a pretty close game with the Cardinals being minus 104 on the money line and the total set at 8. The Rockies are on the road against the Angels. They are plus 102 on the money line as a slight underdog with the total set at 9. If you like those lines, you can bet on all of that and more right now at FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. As a reminder to all of you watching and listening, please let me know down in the comments section which position battles you think are key for Penn State going into the game against West Virginia. And if you want to add any predictions as well, early predictions for Penn State, West Virginia, I'd love to hear them. Now, going back to linebacker number 2 before we get to the offensive tackles, and there's still a lot of key rotational roles, backups that we'll cover in the third segment. Linebacker number 2 is important because, especially if the base defense is going to be that 4-2-5 with KJ Winston and Jalen Reed as two safeties in addition to Zach Wheatley on the football field, who's going to be that second linebacker? Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, Tyler Elsdon. Don't forget about guys like Kavion Keys, Tamir Robinson that are just starting to come into their own now as they are in their second season with Penn State. I think Dom DeLuca and Tony Rojas are going to lead the way as far as the competition goes. I think Kavion Keys is a long shot. I think he'll play more, but he's not going to be an instant impact starter, if you will. Everybody is looking to Tony Rojas. And Dom DeLuca has been that veteran. He's going to be a captain on special teams again, as he was last season. So it makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if, again, another situation where you just rotate them in to keep fresh legs. Kobe King is a 3-down linebacker. I don't think he's leaving that Mike linebacker spot. But who's going to be separate to him? Who's going to be next to him more often than not? Look for a Dom DeLuca, a Tony Rojas to compete. I think both of them. I think both of them add different kind of skill sets, kind of like Amari Evans and Julian Fleming here, where you have Dom DeLuca as more of a run stuffer, a physical presence, and then Tony Rojas, who can, not necessarily be overmatched by a tight end speed, or maybe he can stick with the slot receiver for a moment, depending on what kind of play is being called. Tony Rojas offers a little more speed here, but I'm going to side with football intelligence when it comes to Dom DeLuca simply because he is a veteran. But that's a battle to watch. Who is going to play in that second linebacker spot next to Kobe King in that 4-2-5 defense? Don't count out Tyler Elsdon. He's going to factor into playing time as well. I think that's going to be your first, and people can back up Kobe King too. It's not that Kobe King is never going to come off of the field, but I think you got to look at who's going to be the starting second linebacker. And then after that, who's going to rotate in frequently? A Tyler Elsdon, a Kavion Keys, potentially a Tamir Robinson as well. Penn State's linebacker depth, while it's unproven, there's still a lot to like about it from these previous recruiting classes. And then over to starting tackle as we flip it back over to the offense. So the offensive line is my biggest concern going into this season. Linebacker there is a question mark and is further down the totem pole as far as the strongest position groups for Penn State. But offensive line, when you lose Olu Fashanu, you lose Hunter Norzad, you lose Caden Wallace, and that was what we found out, very quality NFL talent, and the offensive line was average at best, sometimes a little bit above average at times, but there really wasn't that. They weren't a sound strength for the team, and then you lose all this NFL caliber talent, and it's okay. I've admitted this other times. I look at this group and I think it's good quality college talent, but I'm not looking up and down this list of available names and saying, okay, who's going to be drafted in the near future by an NFL team? Do I think they can play, any of these guys can play their way? And this is across the board from left tackle to right tackle, everything in between. But focusing on the tackles themselves, right? So that's why it's concerning to me. So tackles, especially when you want to keep Drew Aller upright and healthy. Drew Shelton going at it for that starting left tackle spot. Javen Williams is going to factor in. Here's kind of that, I don't necessarily want to identify him as a sleeper choice, because as I start to go through these position battles a little further, I like JB Nelson to be that starting left tackle because of what Penn State has available at guard. Versatility is very important, so that if there is an injury, if there are bumps and bruises, you can end up moving guys over back and forth to where you have the best available players at each position. But I don't know that Drew Shelton is a better option at left tackle than JB Nelson. Shelton came in, played admirably as a true freshman at the end of the season when Olu Fashanu was hurt in his second season as a starter there before he returned and then ultimately got drafted by the Jets. Drew Shelton was okay for a freshman, right? You could admire that performance. Then he's battled injuries here and there, and Shelton just hasn't looked as polished as a true left tackle as you wanted him to be. That's why they tried to swing him over to the right tackle spot, at least light a flame under the seat of Caden Wallace, since Wallace had struggled at times over his career, then really solidified himself. So that competition move was smart by Penn State, and particularly, Phil Troutwine, to make that decision. But if Shelton's going to move back over to left tackle and be that primary blocker, I don't know how much confidence I have in him to be the starter. So that's where JB Nelson, who has been that left guard, that starting left guard for Penn State primarily over the last year, I think he could kick out the tackle. And we've heard that from James Franklin, that Nelson can be a tackle. He has that capability. That is a sleeper pick that I ultimately think will happen. Just because JB Nelson, I think, is a better overall offensive lineman at left tackle. But that's the battle to watch. I think quietly it's going to be Drew Shelton, Javen Williams with JB Nelson in there as well, because you have Vanga Ioane playing for that left guard spot, and Sal Wormley returns as the 6-year veteran. So you don't just bench him. People have said center is a potential battle. As much as I like Cooper Cousins, and I think he will factor into playing time and rotate in, and he has versatility, I think Nick Dawkins is going to be your starter. So I don't really see that as a camp battle. It's more of figuring out how much time will Cooper Cousins, how many snaps will he play throughout the season. Then over at right tackle, Nolan Rucci transfers in. Maybe he could. I don't know that we need to base this off of left and right. I feel like you're just going to have tackle battles at this point, because Anthony Donko played an amazing Peach Bowl, one of the few, right? Because that was an absolute train wreck. But if you had to pick a player out of the bunch, it was Anthony Donko had one of the best performances in that game for Penn State against Ole Miss. And you have to think he's going to be able to roll that into this season. Talking to Landon Tangwall when we did an offensive line preview, and he is very high on Anthony Donko, as he compared him to Olu Fashanu, said that his development is on par. Olu Fashanu has said himself, Landon Tangwall quoted him, that's saying that Fashanu was very impressed with the way that Donko has developed. So Donko is going to battle Nolan Rucci for that right tackle spot, most likely. And if he ends up being the best out of all the tackles available, who's to say that Anthony Donko doesn't end up being that left tackle? But I think just because of the way he is more athletic, I would say he's more sound as a run blocker. I'd feel more comfortable with him on the right side of the line of scrimmage versus the left tackle spot. But these guys are almost positionless, if you will. You're going to have two starting tackle battles. One person's going to protect the blind side of Drew Aller. The other is going to anchor the front side there. But those are the position battles that are key for Penn State, especially at this tackle spot when you lose a first-round pick and a third-round pick in Fashanu and Caden Wallace. We'll finish up with some of the backup rotational players. Tight end number 2, who's behind Tyler Warren. Running back number 3, behind Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. Backup defensive end, starting place kicker. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is also brought to you by Ibotta. Are you taking that dream vacation this summer, but you're dreading the cost? With Ibotta, you get cash back on all of your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories this summer and less time dreaming about them. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn hundreds on items on groceries, to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make the most, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or a fancy dinner you've been craving. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. All you got to do is go to the App Store, the Google Play Store, and download it for free, the Ibotta app, to start earning cash back, and use that code LOCKEDONCollege. That is IBOTTA in the Google Play or the App Store, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Today's episode is brought to you by Factor Meals. Warmer, sunnier days are calling, and you can fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. You can meet your wellness goals in time for the end of summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. So if you're like me, you're not a fan of cooking, but you want healthy and tasty meals, Factor meals are the way to go. Head over to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use that code LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off the next month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. I think it's fair to begin this final segment with place kicker and then go to some of the other rotational battles, the backups, because place kicker is for a starting position battle. Sander Seyko was originally the starter, and then Alex Felkins ultimately took over full time. Remember, Seyko came out and was the first kicker available, and then ultimately Felkins, as a transfer, came in and won the job early in the season and never looked back. Now Chase Meyer comes into the conversation. I'll give you a sleeper pick, potentially. This isn't just between Seyko and Chase Meyer. I think Ryan Barker could actually factor in to being the starting place kicker this season. Barker, one of the top kickers in the nation when he was a recruit not too long ago, because Sander Seyko, how reliable is he? Chase Meyer comes over from a smaller school. He kicked at Tulsa, kicked at UPenn as well, and was good, but he hasn't been a consistent Power 4 kicker. Sander Seyko has been here for years. Obviously didn't transfer, so he's going to factor into this position in battle. And I think most people are going to assume that he leads this one. It's truly a toss-up, and that's why I throw Ryan Barker into the conversation, because I don't think he's far behind here. I would not be surprised if Barker ends up winning the place kicker position battle there for Penn State. It is truly a wide open competition, and they brought in Chase Meyer for that exact reason, because place kicker isn't a sure thing here. It was the same thing with Alex Felkins. It wasn't a sure thing last year. Felkins anchored it down. We'll see if that's Chase Meyer. We'll see if Ryan Barker has developed enough since his time from high school, or if Sander Seyko has become a little more comfortable here being that first place kicker. Tight end number 2 for Penn State. We know that Tyler Warren's going to be tight end number 1. There's really no splitting reps here anymore, where it was overly crowded. Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, that timeshare, then Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. Now it's Warren and everybody else. First up is probably going to be Khalil Dinkins, but I have said throughout winter workouts, spring football, that Khalil Dinkins isn't the sure guy as that second tight end because of how much potential Andrew Rappleyea has. And we can't forget about Luke Reynolds, a former 5-star who enrolled early, is at least going to throw his hat into the ring as well. It's not a given. I will see how training camp unfolds. I've heard a lot of positive intel about Andrew Rappleyea. I will continue to think and believe that he will be the second starting tight end. Maybe by week 4, maybe Khalil Dinkins wins early in the season, and then Andrew Rappleyea kind of quietly takes over in week 4 or 5. It's another one of those cases where the more the merrier. If you split reps at that second tight end spot, it's not a bad thing. I think Khalil Dinkins and Andrew Rappleyea are right there, but I would slightly favor Rappleyea in this case. That's a position battle to certainly watch. Running back number 3. Okay, so we know Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen are your co-starters. They're a 1A and 1B. So who is your third running back? That's going to be left up to Cam Wallace, who was receiving a lot of recognition in last year's training camp, was quietly pushing Trey Potts for the third running back spot. Well, Trey Potts is gone, so it would naturally make sense for the redshirt freshman Cam Wallace to ascend and become that third running back. But it's Quentin Martin who makes this interesting. True freshman, enrolled early. They just want to get him on the football field. As a pure athlete, there's been discussions about potentially moving him to wide receiver if they don't feel good about that position group. That's how good Quentin Martin is, that, well, we don't really like what we have at wide receiver. We feel good about Cam Wallace complementing Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, that we'll move Martin out to wide receiver and try to figure things out from there. Quentin Martin is that good. I think he's that future running back for Penn State after Singleton and Allen move on. But him and Wallace as a 1-2 punch in a year's time will be good. That's not going to be a significant drop off. Of course, that's going to be tough to replace what Singleton and Allen have given Penn State over the past 2 seasons, but Wallace and Martin, I think, will be a good dynamic duo in their own right in due time. But that's running back number 3. Corey Smith, I think is really on the outside looking in just because he enrolled over the summer and didn't have that extra advantage with winter workouts, spring football. And then there is backup defensive end. So it's not really the saving the best for last kind of thing. There's so many position battles here in training camp. Jameel Lyons, Amin Vanover, Smith Vilbert, the way that Penn State likes to operate. They had Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, and then that rotational defensive end. So Denai Dennis Sutton was that last year, where he backed up Chop Robinson, where he backed up Adisa Isaac. He kind of rotated in as that third defensive end. Jameel Lyons, same thing that I'm kind of hearing when it comes to like silently, like a Liam Clifford or an Anthony Donko, as, hey, here's a sleeper player that could probably have a breakout season in Andrew Raplia. Jameel Lyons falls under that category as well. So now you have Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton being those defensive ends. Who's going to be that swing defensive end that is able to rotate in for the two of them? And when they go three pass rushers like that with that formation, Jameel Lyons is probably someone that's going to be coming in as an extra pass rusher specialist. But that's not to say that Amin Vanover, Smith Vilbert, who returns from a long hiatus since he had 3 sacks in the Outback Bowl. Can you believe that? Felt like ages ago. Smith Vilbert is back after that performance against Arkansas and showed a lot of potential, right? Who's to say that he couldn't factor in and be that player as well? Remember, Zariah Fisher is banged up. There is optimism that he will return sooner rather than later. But if he was fully healthy, he would factor into this rotation as well. So assume that Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton are your 1-2 punch at defensive end. Jameel Lyons is going to be that swing, potentially, that swing defensive end. But Zariah Fisher, Amin Vanover, all of those guys are going to contend for that spot. Don't forget about Smith Vilbert. Those guys are all going to factor in to a good amount of playing time as rotational defensive ends behind Carter and Dennis Sutton. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, down in the comments, let me know which position battles you think are the most important. Give some of your predictions, who you think will win some of them, and we'll discuss more about training camp. We're going to get some intel. We're going to get some footage, interviews, all of that and more as training camp has started. Media Day is around the corner, and we are exactly 1 month away from Penn State versus West Virginia. And for more Penn State football content, be sure to keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And for your second listen, enjoy Locked On College Football, hosted by Spencer McLaughlin. I've been a guest on the show multiple times. He's going to get you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron, discussing the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college football. NIL, conference realignment, transfer portal, game previews, the new expanded college football playoffs, and so much more. Again, that is Locked On College Football, now available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day.